It's everyone's right to vote for whoever they want. Everybody knows that. And I'm not about to tell anyone who they should vote for. But what I am going to tell you is who I think you shouldn't vote for if you want the housing market to have any chance of extracting itself from the crisis that has been sliding into, certainly over the last 15 years, but more like the last 30 years, which has led to the reason why fewer people than ever before can afford a home in their 20s. Not just buying homes, but renting as well. It's led to a situation where more and more people are living in substandard accommodation, families crammed into tiny places, a shortage of housing where it's needed most, and what everyone needs to understand if you want to have any chance of changing the housing problems that we face, that I think are the cause of many more problems as a result, you need to understand that almost the entire reason why the housing market is in the state it's in is because of the two-party political system that we have had for 100 years. This is not about voting Tory or voting Labour or voting anyone else. It's about understanding how the system, the political system itself, is failing us as home occupiers. And that's not the fault of the politicians. And we all spend lots of time railing against politicians and that kind of stuff. And goodness knows I've done enough of that myself. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is that the two-party system that we have will never allow the kind of change that's needed to fix the housing market. And every single election, it is exactly the same. We hear them all saying, oh, we're going to build lots of houses. Every single time. And they never do. They never build enough. And we now need more than ever before. In some places, not everywhere. We don't have a housing shortage as a country. There are just places that have a very severe housing shortage. Not voting is part of the problem. Apathy, people who can't be bothered to vote, and the fact that that's more than half of the people who are actually qualified to vote, is the number one reason that the two-party system has lasted so long. Because if enough people bothered to vote, it could have been changed a long time ago. And so I am of the very deeply held view that not voting, it makes you part of the problem. Not voting isn't a protest. Spoiling your ballot is a protest. And that's absolutely a justifiable, legitimate thing to do. And it's not a wasted vote because it is counted. And it's a signal to every single candidate that stood in your constituency that you didn't think any one of them or their parties were worth voting for. The main reason for me doing this video today is because I saw a poll that came out today that said 48% of the people who are planning to vote Labour are planning to vote Labour because they don't want Tories. Not because they want Labour, but because they don't want the Tories. And this is such a big mistake for several reasons. The problem that you think is just the Tories is the two-party system, and we will have the same problem with a Starmer-led government. You will not be getting away from the absolute circus of incompetence and failure that we've had under 14 years of Tory rule, by voting for a Starmer-led Labour government. You will be getting more of the same. That's number one. Number two, don't vote for what you don't want. In other words, don't vote because you don't want something. Vote because you do want something, because otherwise the unintended consequence of this is that we're going to get a government that nobody actually wanted. The same survey said that only 1% of people intending to vote Labour are doing so because of its leader. And only 5% of the survey respondents who said they were voting Labour said it was because of their policies. So 94% of the people intending to vote Labour aren't doing it because of Labour policies or because of their leader. And if that doesn't tell you that we are about to elect, with a huge majority apparently, arguably the worst government, even worse than the Tories have been, I don't know what does. And I understand that, especially if you're relatively new to voting, maybe it's your first time, you just think, well, that's the system, right? There's no point voting for any of the other parties. They're just too small. It's not going to make a difference. And that is why we're still in the situation we're in now. That is why the housing crisis is so bad. That is why so many people are suffering so badly from homelessness and temporary accommodation and unsuitable accommodation, and having to put up with bad landlords, not being able to sell, being trapped in negative equity, not being able to buy. The whole leasehold fiasco, all of it, is because every time there's an election, lots of us vote thinking that our vote's going to make a difference. And the thing is that if we wanted it to, our vote could make a difference. And the way to do it is to vote for anything but the two main parties. Anything but the two main parties. Literally anything else, or spoil your ballot and don't vote for anyone. If you just don't want Tories, there are 7 other parties, including independents, that you can vote for. So there is no excuse for voting Labour if your reason is you don't want Tories. I know that the first past the post system means that if you don't want the Tories, then you have to have another party that gets more votes than the Tories does. And that's why some people think, well, I have to vote Labour just to get the Tories out. And there might be certain constituencies where that is the case. But I feel a sense of total, complete and utter despair today, looking at what the polls say we're going to get. Total, like deep, deep despair. For 1,800 days, we don't get a chance to change anything. And then one day, in roughly every 1,800 days, we get a chance to change it. And it looks like we're going to spaff it up the wall again. I've had lots of people saying to me, but Labour say they're going to do this. And I want to say to those people, have you not heard all of the people who say that every time there's an election, the government promises the world and never delivers? Have you not heard that? And if you have heard that, why do you think it doesn't apply in this case? Our only hope of fixing the housing market is an end to the two-party dominance of the current political system, an end to how the current political system works. It is the only hope. And I say that with respect for people who've been lifelong loyal voters of both parties, the Tory and Labour, because actually both parties have achieved significant things in the past, not in housing, but in other areas. And both parties did have, I think, some justifications for the loyalty of their followers. But both of those parties, in my view, have lost that justification, because the current version of the Labour Party is not a Labour Party at all. It is barely a few clicks left of the Conservative Party. It is a centrist party. It's not a Labour Party. And Keir Starmer is, of every Prime Minister I can think of in my lifetime, he is the worst corporate shill I can think of. And I don't even think he knows it. He's like a useful idiot. I don't know if he realises how he's being used to create an apparently credible... I mean, the things people have said, I mean, even people who are Labour voters and supporters have said about him, and I don't want to turn this into an anti-Keir Starmer video, that's not the point of it. But if you do any research at all, you'll find out that he is no less dishonest, no less of a liar than Boris Johnson or any of the other political leaders. I've always said the trouble is, in being a politician, it's impossible to do your job without lying. They all lie. But for anyone thinking that, we should give them a chance, on what basis? What makes you think they deserve a chance, other than the fact they're not the Tories? What have they done to deserve it? Because at the moment, they're going to win this election, not because they've won it, but just because the Tories lost it. We're about to get a government through a walkover, not because they've impressed people enough to vote for them. And every single person I've spoken to who has voted or is voting Labour is saying, yeah, I mean, I'm not that impressed with them, but, they're not the Tories, are they? And nobody is actually impressed with them, and yet we're going to give them this big majority? Whatever age you are, retired, student, everything in between, if you have had or are having or are experiencing housing hardship and you want that to change and you want to use your vote to change it, because there's nothing else that will change it, you must use your vote for anything other than Labour or Tory. Anything other. It doesn't matter what you do it for, really. If all the people who are going to vote Labour or Tory just don't vote for either of them anymore. And it's not about even the calibre of their candidates. It's about voting against the system that we've had for too long. The system that has failed us, not just in housing, but in many other areas. It is deeply naive and foolish to think that anything about the existing two-party system that we've had for years is going to fix anything at all. So, again, I'm addressing people who have concerns about the housing market and all the other knock-on effects of a bad housing market. I'm not talking about any other policies or any other reasons for voting. But if you want to use your vote to improve the housing market, vote for anyone but Labour or Tory. And if you can't vote for anyone, then vote but spoil your ballot. Make sure it's counted as a protest vote. Because voting for other parties as a protest vote, nobody knows that's a protest vote. The only way to know that it's a protest vote is by spoiling your ballot. That's the only way of voting protest. And it just means you just go in there and scribble. Don't put a cross in any of the boxes. Write something on there. I'm not voting for any of these jokers. I don't want this system. Anything you like, that's all you have to do. Just mark the paper, but not with an X in one of the boxes. And that's your ballot spoiled. And it counts, that's the point. It counts a lot more than not going. Don't forget to take your voter ID. But a vote for better housing requires a vote to end the two-party system we've got now. And because the Tories have done a self-inflicted wipeout, it would appear, there's an opportunity. There's a real opportunity. But if we hand power on a plate to Starmer's version of Labour, I'm afraid we're in for just years more of the same. Years more of nothing. Years more of no change, no improvement. And I don't say this because I'm biased. I'm not biased. I just want a better housing market, because nothing will improve the fortunes of this country, its people and its families and its future than a better housing market, in my view. Better quality, affordable, decent homes. There's nothing we can vote for at this election that's going to give us a better housing market immediately. We have to use this election to end the Tory Labour two-party political system that is what's destroyed the state of this country. That's what this election has to be. And then out of the mess, out of the ashes, something new needs to rise. And whatever it is, anything new will be better than what we've got now. People have asked me, oh, would you actually prefer to have a leader of one of the other parties running the country? And the answer is, any of them would be less bad. Anything would be less bad than carrying on the same as we have for the last 40 years. Please remember that. Any other party, none of them are going to get into government this election, but any other party would be preferable, no matter how shocking they are, to more of the utter failure of government that we have had to put up with for certainly the last 14 years, probably the last 27 years, in fact, because both parties have failed on the housing front. Please vote, but please vote for anyone but Labour or Tory if you want the housing market to have a chance of getting back on its feet. Thanks for listening. See you on the next video. Bye-bye.